I'm Mark Simmons, and I was born in October of 1946, October 2nd. And I was born in Holdridge, Nebraska, which is north of Wichita and a little bit west.
So tell me about your parents.
My mom and dad grew up in a little town in southwest Nebraska called Beaver City. And mom grew up on a farm outside about 15 miles of Beaver City, and dad grew up in town. Uh, mom's father and mother were he homesteaded the property there in Beaver, just outside of Beaver City. And my mom and dad were high school sweethearts, I guess. Mom was a year older than dad in high school. It was a pretty small town, like 600 people. So they knew each other quite well, and all their classmates. And so we moved to Siloam Springs in 1949. And dad had been in the meat industry, cut a hay packing company. And he was selling chickens and meat products from Cudahy to a guy in Denver, Colorado called Frank Pluss. And Dad and Frank decided the chicken business was an opportunity, and so they bought, or they actually leased, a plant in Decatur, Arkansas, and started what was then called Pluss Poultry. Frank Pluss had the money, and Dad had the sweat on his brow, and I think actually my mother and Dad put some money into the business, but it was a very small organization to start with, and they moved to Siloam Springs because, as I understand it, they couldn't find a house to rent in Decatur, so they found a house here in Siloam, and so we ended up in Siloam. It's interesting because right now we're just finishing up a history project on Simmons Foods, which was started as Pluss Poultry, and my dad bought out Frank's interest in '55. But I've been learning a lot about our company history. I've heard a lot of the stories. A lot of the stories are in our history or come from me, but we've been getting a lot of other information from past employees and current employees, and it's been an interesting process to do this history plan.
What are some of the interesting stories that have come out that maybe you didn't remember or didn't that people have told from this project?
Oh, I think I think one of them was the why that Dad moved the business here to Siloam. It wasn't long after they started that in Decatur and Decatur didn't have a sewer system at that time, and so there were some complaints about problems with the little stream that ran through Decatur, probably rightfully so, because nobody had a sewer, and Dad was trying to get Decatur to do something, put in a sewer system and serve the whole community, and there seemed to be resistance, and the folks here in Siloam, not only did they commit to put in a sewer system and improve it, but they also, and this is something I didn't know, they raised money to help Dad build the new plant, and new it was built. And the interesting thing that I found was they made a decision in '51 to build, and they were running chickens in like the summer of or spring of 1952. So they made the decision and got the plant built, started processing in less than a year, which just really blew my mind. And there was a news article in the local newspaper about a meeting back in early '51 where they community leaders and businesses made a commitment and made contributions. I think the largest one was may have been $500. But they raised over almost $20,000 to entice Bill Simmons to come build a plant in Siloam Springs.
Well, let's talk about how you got involved with the company. When did you first start working for your family business, and then how did, I guess you still are?
Yeah, I still am. It's interesting. One of the things that we did when I was growing up in the '50s was our Sunday afternoon recreation was for Dad and Mom and whatever kid didn't have something going on, ride out in the countryside and look at the farms and look at the plants that he was involved with. And so that was my earliest involvement, was making Sunday afternoon inspections of chicken farms and processing plants. I always assumed that I was going to come back to the company, and I'm not 100% sure what Dad assumed, but I don't remember a specific sit-down discussion about what I was going to do when I got through with school. But I think my first job was to take over milking a small herd of dairy cows that Dad owned personally, and he was in a partnership deal with a guy over in Prairie Grove, and that guy got out of the dairy business, and so Dad all of a sudden had 50 head of cows that he needed to have somebody take care of, and so that was my summer job. Was when I think I had a driver's license. It was I drove to the farm every morning before daybreak to milk these 50 head of cows, and I probably wasn't the best milk hand, but I got the job done. And so I did that for one summer while I was still in high school.
Were you milking these by hand, or what about?
It was a grade C dairy, cow to can. So we had the traditional milking nozzles, and the milk went down into a can, 10-gallon milk can, like you used to see a lot of them around. And I was not a big, strong kid. I was a skinny kid, and I had trouble getting those milk cans lifted up and set into the milk cooler that. And so I didn't fill them all the way the first half of the summer because I couldn't lift them up and put them in the cooler. So by the end of the summer I could, and but I couldn't raise my arm up over my head to throw a baseball. I had to throw sidearm because the work of lifting those cans. So that was really the first job I had. I went to work when I was in college. I worked each summer at the company, and so I think I did some farm work on chicken farms, and then another summer I worked in our poultry byproducts plant, our rendering plant, where we took chicken viscera and heads and feet and feathers and cooked them down and made feed ingredients. And we're still in that business today in a big way. That's one of our prime businesses, is making feed ingredients for pet food companies, and we're also in the pet food business in a big way, canned pet food, and then poultry for human consumption.
So, and some arguably you started off with the hardest jobs in the company. I mean, you didn't get the easy assignments. It doesn't sound like milking cows and working at the rendering plant,
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
So your dad, I guess, wanted to see if you could stick it out, and then eventually you moved up. Talk about that, how you went from the tougher jobs to now.
Well, uh, that's probably the way it ought to be. That's the way my son Todd, we introduced him to the business, was to learn the business from the ground up, if you will, and earn the respect of the people you're going to be working with, and are working with. So that was, you know, we did that, and that was kind of almost just happened, but as I went through college and worked at the different jobs during college, it was I gained a huge amount of experience. So
When did you become in charge of or how did you become in charge of the company, and then eventually pass along the torch to your son?
well, my dad was a really hardworking guy, and but he had some health issues. One in the 50s, he wasn't necessarily that overweight. He carried more weight than he should, like a lot of us. But he had terribly high blood pressure, and that was in the 50s. That was before there was very many medicines that could control blood pressure very well. And so, if he walked into a hospital emergency room today, they wouldn't have let him left the hospital because his blood pressure was so high on a regular basis. And so that that really didn't cause much issue until he had an aneurysm in his descending aorta, and so that's kind of a balloon in the blood vessel. And he had emergency surgery, and I think it was 1960, and so, in Washington Regional, they replaced his aorta from his heart clear down to his legs, which just blows my mind that they could do that in 1960. He nearly didn't survive, but he did, and so he had a couple more health episodes about every 2 years until he passed away in 1974, after having been in the hospital almost a year. So I was back out of school in '68, and had been working with him and with the company since 1964. And so when and I'm the only son. I've got three sisters, and one of them was involved somewhat with the business for several years, but in the accounting role. But I was only one of the four children that did an active day-to-day participation. So when Dad was incapacitated about three different times, folks kind of turned around and looked at me, and I didn't, I guess I stepped up to the plate. I don't remember, going, hey, this is mine now. But in '73, when he went into the hospital with a stroke, a significant stroke, and really was non-communicative. He was, you could talk to him, and he would. I think he would recognize what you were saying to him, but he couldn't speak for over a year. And then he passed away in September of '74. So so it was, there was kind of a year period where things were in limbo. Dad had been sick and got well and pushed the company, and been sick and gotten well and pushed again. And so we just kind of assumed that he was going to survive. And so we kept, the organization and Dad had numerous good people working with him. And so we just kept things going and thought about what we were going to do when he got out of the hospital. Well, he did it that last time, so I basically assumed the responsibility of running the company, and I was 26 years old, I think, something like that, when he went into the hospital. I may have been 20. I was almost. My birthday's in October, so I was 27 immediately after he passed away. So that's pretty good struggle for a young guy and who had a wife, and at that time we had one child, Todd, who subsequently took over the company. But that was pretty. I probably didn't realize the magnitude of what really was happening.
How big was the company then, and how has it grown over the years when you took over?
Well, in the early days, in the late '60s, early '70s, we had one plant here in Siloam, the poultry processing plant, and then we had the rendering plant here outside of Siloam, and then had three other rendering plants. So we were pretty concentrated in the rendering business, and I think as far as size, in say '75, we probably had 350 employees. We've got over 10,000 today, which is not huge, but it's a lot of people. I think our total sales in 1975 or 6 were in the 40-50 million, and we're going to be 3 billion this coming year. So we've grown a lot. fits and starts, and it's not just a smooth line. We did a number of acquisitions over the years, and so on.
What were some of the key acquisitions that have helped build the company?
In 1982, we bought the O'Brien company that had chicken processing plant in Southwest City, Missouri, which we still own. I don't think there's an original wall of that plant still standing. It had a chicken processing plant and a rendering plant, and we rebuilt both of those completely since we bought it way back when. They also had a plant in Jay, Oklahoma, and they had a feed mill in Anderson, and Anderson, Missouri. We divested both of those over the time after we built a new, more modern feed mill and expanded our other feed mills. So I don't know. We've done dozens of acquisitions.
Let's talk about the transition from you to Todd running the company, and from all accounts, he's done a great job.
He has.
So just kind of in your own words, tell me how you phased out and he phased in. Did you train him like you did checking the farms back in the day?
Well, Todd has had a thorough education in operations, and as opposed to my dad, I think Todd and I could say, hey, yeah, we had numerous conversations about what he wanted to do, what he needed to do to be able to do the things he wanted to do. So we talked about and I think he would say that he has always wanted to be a chicken man, and so he is. We talked about the schooling that he needed, and and what how to get him acclimated into the business. And so we had a very thorough plan for his early education. The business he did like I did. His first job was at our J processing plant and hanging chickens, and so he did that. You know, each summer he did. He did a different tour of duty, if you want to think of it that way, at different facilities. Maybe 4 weeks, 3 or 4 weeks at a breeder farm, and I think the only two places that he didn't get. I'm not sure he ever actually worked in the feed mill, but he worked in processing and on farms and that kind of thing. So when he got out of college, he was grounded in the business, and so he started. We gave him a year off out of school to do something other than just come back and hit it hard. And he was a sales rep in Colorado for us. We were servicing the KFCs in the Colorado, Utah region, and then also had a lot of business with King Super and City Market out there. And so he was doing store detail work out through there. And I told him, I said, now when it's winter, you strap the skis on top of the car and you stop at each ski slope on your way from one store to the next. And so he did that. And then he got, it didn't last a year because he decided to get married, and so he had to cut his Colorado venture a little bit short to get married.
I know over the years your company has had like a mission statement or like bullet points of values and stuff. And talk about the values that you developed and then how that Todd maybe has changed that over as updated it maybe.
Yeah. You know, it was we didn't have, and I think a lot of companies didn't have a mission, vision, value statement back in the 50s and 60s. You just went to work and did what you could, and our company was small enough that the senior leadership, including myself and my dad, our values just kind of rubbed off on the organization, and it was not well. I didn't feel it was necessary to be able to state everything. In the mid '80s, we sat down and came up with a set of value statements that were the first time that we did that. And I think we had 10 value statements. And then in the late 80s, we came up with a mission statement, and it was, we'd studied it, looked and talked about it, and so one of the things that we wanted to do was to have a fairly short mission statement that you could say in one breath, and that was pretty easy for people to remember. So our mission statement still is today: the people of Simmons are building a great company using innovative ideas to provide quality food products and services to a changing world. Pretty simple, straightforward. You know, there's five significant points in there. And my dad was a super innovator. He would an entrepreneur. He would try almost anything if it had a snowball's chance of doing it. So that innovation was the first part of it. And the people of Simmons very first part of that is to say, hey, it's not Mark or Todd or just the Simmons family. It's all of us have to be together to make this thing work. And we've got to use innovative ideas, and we've got to make quality food products for our people. And we put food products in there because we we're in a car company. We didn't make airplanes. We put some fences around what we wanted our people to think about and try to do. And then we also wanted to make sure that we didn't limit ourselves to what's going on right now. So that's the changing world side of it. And that's in the chicken business. If you don't keep up and stay ahead, you won't be there. There were, I think in the 50s, there were probably 150 chicken companies in the United States of various kinds. And today there's maybe 20 of substance. So we've survived through innovation and hard work and perseverance. And all those qualities my dad demonstrated with a vengeance. He really worked hard at it.
Well, before we move on to other topics, let's talk about the fight that your company and other poultry companies have had over the years with Oklahoma and other environmental concerns.
Yeah, and it's still going on.
So
we
kind of summarize what you did and how the companies came together eventually to fight the regulations.
Well, it's not so much fight the regulation, but a few individuals. We accept the responsibility of, and the issue in Northwest Arkansas is the Illinois River, and mostly poultry litter as a quality fertilizer, and then also the discharge from the various cities. The quality of their treated effluent going into the Illinois River. So you have an unusual situation here where the population base is at the headwaters of the Illinois River, and once you get past Siloam Springs, there's very, very little population base until you get down to Tahlequah, Oklahoma. And so the river's it's a high quality river, and all of us want to keep it that way and make sure it survives. There was a time in the early 80s when there probably was more poultry litter being applied to the ground to fertilize our pastures than what was appropriate. So there was a push in the 80s to establish nutrient management plans, and we did that through the state resources commissions, and they relied upon the science from the agricultural department. So the most of those nutrient management plans were first written in the 80s and early 90s. In fact, all of them were based on on nitrogen as the issue of having too much nitrogen in the stream, which would cause algae growth, and so the stream wouldn't be as clear as you wanted it because of the algae that was in the stream. So we encouraged our growers to develop nutrient management plans for their farms so that any water that ran off didn't have too much nutrients in it for the river. And so from that standpoint, in the early 80s, recognition that this could be an issue, along with the wastewater going from the cities going into the stream, we've made progress every year. Some folks don't recognize that progress for a variety of reasons, but So it's been something that we've contended with for, gosh, 40 years now. And today I think the Illinois River in 2023 is as good a shape as it's been in a probably 4 decades, 5 decades. And that comes from requiring nutrient management plans that include not just nitrogen but phosphorus, which in the late 90s was recognized as an issue, so we addressed it. Upgrading our water treatment plants at the 5 major cities in northwest Arkansas to include phosphorus limitations and keep it improved there, and supporting legislation that required anybody in a nutrient limited watershed to have a nutrient management plan, whether you're in Arkansas, whether it's poultry litter or commercial fertilizer. If you're going to fertilize more than 2.5 acres with any kind of fertilizer in northwest Arkansas, you have to have a nutrient management plan that your NRCS helps you develop. And it's not quite as stringent in Oklahoma as far as that. You can use all the commercial fertilizer you want right now in Oklahoma without a nutrient management plan. But if you apply poultry litter, you have to have a nutrient management plan. And we're still talking about those issues.
So over the years, the poultry companies in Oklahoma, while sometimes adversarial, have kind of worked together to develop a plan to make the river better. Is that fair?
Yeah, and it's been interesting because certain times and certain agencies have worked well together, and other times and it's been very, very adversarial. Particularly with the Oklahoma Attorney General, and those kinds of things. So it's an ongoing battle, unfortunately.
Well, let's talk about the town, what it was like when you first moved here. You said you had trouble finding a place to live in Decatur, and so you ended up here.
Yeah.
What was it like when you were a kid and when you were going to school here? What was the town like?
Well, it was obviously a lot smaller. We, of course, I was young. I was 3 when we moved into northwest Arkansas. So some of my earliest memories are hazy, but I can point to the 4 houses that we lived in between 1949 and 1953, when Mom and Dad were finally able to buy a house on Tahlequah Street, and so the 4 different rent houses, and I've lived in I'm counted 9 different places in Siloam Springs, all within a half a mile radius of each other, and so it's been interesting. Our house on Tahlequah Street, when I went to first grade, I went about a half a block to a 4-story brick building that had been built by the WPA in the 30s as the Siloam School. And the neatest thing about it was that the fire escapes that it had were a tube with a spiral circle in it. And so if you were in Mrs. Speak's music class on the 4th floor when the fire drill occurred, you had the thrill of spiraling down that and kids coming in on each of the 2nd and 3rd floor into that fire escape system. Of course, I lived I lived half a block from there, and in the summertime, I'd go over to the school, and when it was open, when the janitor was there working, we'd go up and slide down that thing for fun, and so I was pretty experienced with it, and it was an interesting time. It's small, it's a small local town that you could ride your bike all over town, and I don't I'm not sure there were any stop lights. And there were stop signs, but not stop lights that I know of in 1950, in the mid 50s.
What was it like to drive to Bentonville or Rogers in those days, and how would you go?
They Bentonville and Rogers and Fayetteville were other very small towns way far away. It seemed like. It's interesting because here in Siloam, uh, in the late 50s and early 60s, Tulsa was an economic influence for us. I can remember going to Tulsa with Mom to Christmas shop, and it was a major adventure going to Tulsa on old Highway 33. At 100 or 90 miles almost, not quite 100, but so I think there was a period when, at least for our family, when Tulsa was more important than Rogers, Bentonville, and Fayetteville. Uh, I do remember going to football games in the late 50s in Fayetteville, and when I went to college was 1964 in Fayetteville, and I met my wife Diane there. She was from Texas, but our first um, experience with football was winning all 10 regular season games in 1964 and winning the Cotton Bowl. And then the next year we won all 10 regular season games. So we were 21-0 going into the Cotton Bowl in Dallas, and we lost the first game that as a student for me it was a Cotton Bowl, and we lost it against LSU. And of course that 64-65 team was a famous team with some really famous players, the Phillips boys, and uh, a guy in Dallas who now owns the Cowboys, played on that team, and his Jimmy Johnson, his coach, early on in the Cowboys, was on that team. So it was, we were in school with some of the legends, Arkansas football legends, for sure.
Um, One of the things that a lot of the people we've interviewed have talked about the impact of the Walton family and Walmart on Benton County. And so, what are some of the memories you have of Walmart and the Walton family?
Well, my dad and Mr. Sam were mostly contemporaries. Dad was a little older than Sam. Um, and you got to recognize there was a time when Simmons Foods was substantially larger than Walmart. And Sam had when he moved up here, he had the dime store on the square, and then started the Walmart stores. And store 4 is here in Siloam Springs. Our super center has got number 4. So we absolutely grew up watching Walmart and knowing some of the Walton kids, and knowing Mr. Sam's son. My dad and Sam and Cass Huff and on the second go round, Frank Broyles tried to build an airport, in a regional airport, and back in the it probably would have been in the early 60s. They were unsuccessful. One of the few things that they were unsuccessful in doing. But they had a site over by Tonington where they wanted to build an airport to replace the Drake Field. Drake Field was a good airport, but it was down in a hole and did not have good approaches. And that was before that Drake Field's in Fayetteville, south of Fayetteville, and that was before the modern aviation electronics and guidance systems. And so it many times you'd try to come in on to Drake Field on a commercial flight, and it would not land at Drake Field because it was socked in or raining or whatever. So my dad and Cass Huff with Daisy Air Rifle and Mr. Sam and several others who utilized private airplanes knew the need and the advantage of modern air travel. And so they got together on two different occasions to try to build an airport. I've got it's in my son Todd's room, but I've got a football that Frank Burroughs came to Siloam to help promote an election to support a regional airport, and he gave out footballs, and I got one of them. So I've got that as a memento from my early days. So the Walton family, Mr. Walton, we're all hardworking folks. Mr. Sam, in particular, I was a kid, and then in college, and then the early days of Walmart was when I was running the business, and Sam was expanding so fast, and I thought, man, this guy's going to fall on his face. It was a struggle in our business to keep our growth at 6 or 10% and have good managers and so on. Because the poultry business has got so many different technologies and different things you have to master. We hatch eggs, we make feed, we have breeder hens that lay eggs, and we have broilers, and then we have processing plants. And so we've got a huge number of technologies that our people have to master to be successful. And I'm not diminishing the complexity of real estate or realtors of merchants, but I think back then it was simpler than what we did. They bought stuff, they moved it, and they sold it, and that they still do that today. It's a little bigger scale. The logistics side of it is as we now recognize is much more complicated. Not than it used to be, but to be able to serve people and do it in a very economical manner is complicated. And that's one thing that Mr. Sam recognized was, hey, we've got to be leaders in efficiency of buying and moving and storing and transporting and retailing stuff. And he was a master of that, obviously. Walmart wouldn't have been today what it is without his guidance and leadership.
Good. Let's talk about the Northwest Arkansas Council. You said they'd had a couple of failed efforts early back in the day trying to get a regional airport. And when the council, let's talk about why it was formed and then some of its early focuses like a regional airport.
Yeah. Excuse me. I'm sure Mr. Sam's understanding of what it took to get things done in a community was strengthened by some of the things that he tried to get done in Northwest Arkansas early. Working with ad hoc working with other business people, where they got together relatively infrequently and said, "Hey, we need this for our community." And we had, when you look back in the 50s and 60s, you had well, small towns basically, Bentonville, Rogers, Springdale, and Fayetteville were not big towns. Siloam Springs was even way smaller. Gentry and Decatur, even smaller yet. So we didn't have, if you'd put us all together and, compressed us, we would have had back then maybe, I don't know, not even 100,000 people, probably 50,000 in the 50s. So today we're 5 to 700,000, depends on how broadly you draw your circle. And that's still, that's a small metropolitan area, really, when you think about it. But so Sam and the other business leaders up here had tried to get some stuff done and had not been able to. And I was involved, I think maybe in a few discussion meetings before before Mr. Sam brought folks together. He invited probably 40 people to a lunch. And he basically told us where he had been and where folks like my dad had been, and Don Tyson had been involved, and J.B. Hunt had become a significant economic factor in Northwest Arkansas by then. And so he described some of the earlier efforts and basically said, we've got to get together. We've got to put an organization together that has substance, and we've got to list out some key things we want to do, and we got to get it done. And so he basically told us what to go do. And he said, and I'm going to ask my daughter Alice to lead this effort. It wasn't an ask. He told her, but he framed it as a request. And so that was the start of the Northwest Council, which I think has made a huge difference in many, many things that have happened in Northwest Arkansas since that day. I think that I'd be guessing, but I think that date was 89 or 90, somewhere along in there. And so one of the first things they did was to formalize a board of directors. Yeah, I think they used the term board of directors, and I was on it from our region, and there was no real structure on how the future boards were going to be. They just brought folks together and said, "Mark, would you be on the board?" And I said, "Yeah." And they did that with about 40 people, I think, as I recall. And one of the major first things they did was hire Uvalde Lindsay as the manager. I think they probably called him a director. I'm not sure. And Alice as the chairperson of the board. So Alice and and Uvalde set out, along with Uvalde's wife Carol, set out and started a plan of action with the board's interaction and support. And so Highway 412 didn't have that name, but that was one of the things. 4-lane between Oklahoma State line and Springdale. Getting Highway 49 designated as an interstate and completed to interstate standards from the Missouri line down to Interstate 40 was one of them. Establishing a regional airport was one of them. And so those three significant projects were the regional side of it. And then putting together people of just bringing people together from the region so that we understood what everybody was trying to do better and could focus on what we needed to do as and encouraging each community to do what it should do. We were all really, the leaders were business people. There was not, it was not a governmental thing at all.
What are some of the things you can do with a small group like that or an organization when you have a broad group behind you? I mean, how does that give you more say when you go to Washington or Little Rock?
Well,
I mean, what are some of the things that a group like that can do maybe that a lobbyist couldn't?
an individual city couldn't go to Little Rock and say, we need to establish a multi-city, multi-county legislation to allow transportation board to come together. So that's one of the things it took to get the regional airport. We had to establish a legal entity to buy land and build an airport. Well, there was no state legislation to do that. So we went to Little Rock, worked with our local legislators, came up with a plan to create a state law that allowed for counties and cities to collaborate on transportation projects. So that's how the airport authority got established. And I was being on, they asked me to serve on that airport authority board. So I was the first vice chair. Westmoreland was the chairman, and he was chairman for I think 2 years while we were getting things arranged, and then so that Northwest Council, saw the need and figured, and Uvalde and others figured out, well, we got to have a structure, and so the need was demonstrated through the council to the state legislature, to the governor, to be able to get legislation passed. And so Fayetteville couldn't have done that on their own. Springdale and Rogers couldn't have. So it took us together creating an entity and changing the state law to be able to create the entity that now controls the airport authority.
Anything else you want to say about the council before we go on to their topics?
Well, it has been an extremely successful organization, I think. All voluntary, just as far as the due structure, and we council goes out and asks businesses primarily to contribute. The Walton family has been huge supporters of the council in that manner. They provided more than 50% of the funding for a long time And then, Tyson Hunt, Simmons, and many, many others came alongside and supported the council, and it still does today. But it's been an impressive organization to be able to work with 5 cities, 5 chambers of commerce, and all of the businesses there, and to basically do it without very many squabbles. Which is, and to be honest, if there's been a contentious issue, we've a lot of times just avoided it. Just, you don't have to solve every problem in the world. You can just wait till it gets less contentious.
Looking back, Mark, the stuff that the council did, do you think it had a significant impact on the growth? I mean, how would you evaluate it?
Oh, it's allowed us to continue to grow, but it also has provided the planning for the amenities and the things that we needed to sustain that growth. And so it's been very, very instrumental. We would not be here today in the way we are without having had the council.
What are some of the things maybe behind the scene that the Waltons and the Walton Foundation has done that probably average people don't know about? One example, I was talking the other day to David Cameron. He was talking about the kayak park and what a huge role behind the scenes they played on that. What are some of those and other things the Waltons have done maybe that you can think of, if there are some?
Well, it's been interesting in Northwest Arkansas that you've had leaders, business leaders primarily. Well, we've had really good politicians and leadership in most of the cities, but the business leaders coming together has been very, very instrumental. And so, and Sam is the epitome of that. And that's carried over to the rest of the family, particularly Jim and his sons have been extremely influential in the last 2 decades. But Mr. Sam and if you go back, my dad and others were really, really interested in helping other people improve their lives, and that meant good roads, good transportation, good high quality products in their stores, and so on. So it was it's just been a great leadership experience.
Is there anything else you want to talk about that I haven't asked about, maybe before I go into some of the final questions? Any reflections or any thoughts you want to add? We can come back to that if you want.
No.
So if someone that had never been to Arkansas or Siloam came to you and said, "Hey, Mr. Simmons, tell me about Siloam Springs. What's the town like?" What would you tell them?
I'd tell them to get off of 412 and go to downtown Siloam Springs and drive around the community. And because 412 is is a major highway coming through town. It's got all the fast food places and all. Unfortunately, the commercial district moved out to what was supposed to be a bypass back in the 60s, but we still have a beautiful small town with beautiful geography and nice beautiful stream running through it, and Sager Creek, and a great Christian college here, and it is just so still friendly town, and but you've got to get 2 blocks away from the main artery to be able to really see where you're at. And that's somewhat true of of Fayetteville and Springdale and Rogers and Bentonville also. What you see driving on Interstate 49 is not what we are. It's that's our transportation network.
How would you finish this sentence? My favorite thing about Siloam Springs is, restate it like that. My favorite thing about it.
Oh, I think my favorite thing about Siloam is the geography and the people in it. And there's just a lot of friendly folks, and the geography allows for twisting roads and to cross over the creek 3 or 4 times while you're inside the town, and see the dams in downtown and the small lakes and so on.
Let's do the same thing on Benton County. If someone came to you from another state and said, "What's Benton County like, Mr. Sanders? Tell me about." What would you tell them? Benton County is.
Well, Benton County is still rural. It's not nearly as rural along Interstate 49, but it is still a rural agricultural mecca. Wonderful, wonderful environmental considerations. Got lots of environmental amenities out east of Siloam Springs. There's a Logan Preserve, which is run by the Nature Conservancy, and it's a beautiful area that's available to the public over on the east side of Interstate 49. We've got Hobbs State Park, Beaver Lake, and just all kinds of wonderful things that are happening that you can see nature and access nature, not just see it, but you can go play in it and get to it. You know, there's lots of places in the world that have got beautiful nature stuff, but it's hard to get to. Here it's all scattered amongst us, and you know, we can drive out here 1.5 miles and see native prairie that's never been plowed or planted, and you can go down in the hills and hollers and play in a kayak park and that has been developed, and a second one coming on downstream about 3 miles that is yet to open. So it's just quite a place, and not to mention world-class Crystal Bridges Museum. You know, my goodness, you know, it's hard to imagine that it's been open now. God, what is it? It started in 2011, I think, and so we're now 12 years into it. It seems like it's always been there, but it's so beautiful.
Nice. Okay, one last thing. Just make this a short sentence. My favorite thing about Benton County is.
Well, I think my favorite thing about Benton County are the people. Just love to work with the people.